People in the US military, what's the creepiest, most paranormal thing you have encountered during your service? This is my dad's story. After he was done in Vietnam, he soon stationed at an Air Force base in Greenland. They had bad blizzards often there, and when they came through, the base shut down and every section of the barracks would take roll call. These blizzards are intense. There were cables running between all the buildings you attached to your person with a carabiner, so if there was a sudden whiteout you didn't get lost and die. They had people die literally 20 meters from shelter because they got lost in bad weather and froze. He said for about 5 months every time they locked down for weather they would hear horrendous screaming outside. Everyone was accounted for, so they didn't risk sending anyone out to investigate. They wrote it off as an animal. However, every time this was heard, the engine room would be wrecked. Tools everywhere, paperwork all over the floor, tables and toolboxes knocked over. Even one time a several thousand-pound jet engine had been lifted from its workbench crane thing and smashed almost 30 feet away. The hangars and engine room had cameras covering every single possible entrance with spotlights that made them clear even in a whiteout. No animals, no people, no anything was ever seen entering or leaving those buildings. Then one day it just stopped. Edit okay. Since I have a lot of debate on what could have caused this, I will clear some stuff up. This was not something they just shrugged at. It cost a lot of money and threw a wrench in at least one surveillance routine, which caused a lot of brass from the DoD and the CIA to breath fire down the base commander's neck. This facility, beyond military function, served as a base for a lot of civilian research as well. There was a full investigation using all manner of scientists, engineers, and specialists. They came up with no satisfactory explanation for what was happening. I do not believe in the paranormal, nor did my father. This is the only spooky type story he has from 22 years in the service. No one knows what happened. It was very strange in every way. Hundreds of people wrote reports and documented this. It wasn't just some grease monkeys scratching their heads and randomly guessing. That said, I spoke to my mom. She told me a couple things I missed. After one of these occasions, the U2 in the shop had all its electronics turned on. Many of the systems in this plane were special built for this airframe and this particular cruise mission. These systems were complex and archaic. Very few people knew how to operate this machinery, and the only ones on base that could were 2 engineers and its crew. It wasn't a simple matter of hitting power buttons and flipping switches from off to on. Another time 3 barrels of hydraulic fluid vanished and were never found. They doubted the screaming noise was wind because it came in short, irregular bursts, and winds never produced those sounds again. They theorized it was a polar bear, but if it was, its coincidental timing was extremely uncanny. Lastly, control picked up a bunch of weird interference and anomalous readings that, again, had the uncanny timing of happening only when this was going on. They were never able to reproduce these errors in a controlled manner. Thank you guys for reading. Edit to okay, since I am still getting a stream of people saying I believe this was something supernatural or aliens or something. No. What I am saying is that the best possible explanation is a series of many unrelated, unlikely, and unreproducible events came together in an also unlikely manner that left no satisfactory explanation for what was going on. The screaming was thought to be a polar bear or something. The radar glitches were thought to be due to moisture but left no obvious signs. The barrels were most likely the result of an inventory error, etc, etc, etc. However, even with this all in mind, the chances of all these events coming together, in this manner, by sheer coincidence, is astronomical, so no one was willing to say anything with certainty. Thus no satisfactory answer, and writing it off as an act of God. It's creepy, it's bizarre, but it's not supernatural, and the answer isn't simply it's the wind. For more info, see my replies to others about the construction of the place, the cameras, etc. Creepy at first, ended in a facepalm. I was a young sergeant in 2006 stationed at FT Bliss. Right outside of FT Bliss was a training area that was near Big Zepfield. We were guarding some equipment overnight so the company wouldn't have to stay. It was me and one private. I told him he would take shifts patrolling, and since we were allowed to have cars out there, the other would nap in his car. I woke up to my soldier knocking on my window in a complete panic. It scared me at first. Private, Sergeant, wake up. There's UFOs out here. Me, what? private points in the direction, and sure as it I see these lights that seemed like they were floating around and then disappearing. Took me a moment as I had just woken up. That's the Franklin Mountain Range. You're looking at the cars driving on the scenic route. The cars would be visible and then disappear when they went around the corner of a turn, only to appear again when they came back around. I was very agitated at first, but the next day it was by far the funniest experience I had in the military. I was working the night shift in an old SIF that was originally built back in the 50s. I was starting to feel sleepy, so I went for a walk to wake myself up and ended up getting lost in the maze of underground tunnels. Finding myself in a part of the complex that obviously hadn't been used in decades. Everything looked like it was just left there and forgotten one day, eerily frozen in time. I was extremely tired and stressed out from work, and that really didn't help me to be able to rationally retrace my steps. Everything around me seemed like something was hiding in the shadows and watching me. It took a long time, but I finally made it back to my position and didn't tell anyone what happened. Luckily it was the night shift and no one noticed I was gone. A year later we got a new guy, and in the middle of the night shift he got up and went for a walk. A couple of hours later he came back looking like he'd seen a ghost. I just gave him a knowing nod, and he knew I knew exactly what he just went through. A friend of mine went to Afghanistan and got stationed in an area that was used as a base by the Soviets. He swears that sometimes when he was on sentry duty he could hear whispers that didn't sound like English or the local languages. He's convinced he heard Russian. My best friend's grandfather worked in some unspecified but very high security unit. He refused to talk about most of his experiences, but anytime the subject of aliens UFOs came up, he'd get extremely serious out of nowhere and basically force the conversation to be changed. My friend said it was very unnerving to see the fear in his face. One time, my buddy finally pushed him on it and asked him if he believed in aliens, and his grandfather just said, "If you honestly think we're alone, then you're ignorant as it." The sincerity that was in his voice still bothers my friend. US Navy photographer here. In the deepest parts of the ocean, you will often steam past small boats that are empty or seemingly empty. Sometimes they look like they got loose and no one looked for them. Sometimes they look disgusting, like someone lived in them until they couldn't. Sometimes it's obvious someone is still in them but they haven't moved for weeks. One time, my roommate got treated with respect by superiors. I was by myself in the engine room of a submarine on the mid-watch. Just a newly reported sailor trying to find equipment so I could display knowledge to one of the watchstanders. There are a number of bays in engine room lower level with narrow passages that pass through the center. I came down one of the ladders, and I swore I saw someone walk across the ship about 15 feet in front of me. I could hear his footsteps as he walked around a corner and out of sight. 3 problems. 1. He was wearing utilities, an older, light blue blouse and dark navy slacks. Nobody had utilities anymore. They had been phased out 3 years earlier. 2. There was only one other person awake in the engine room that late at night, and he was standing at the top of the ladder behind me, waiting for me to come back up with an answer to his question. 3. He wasn't actually there. I wrote it off as sleep deprivation, but I'll admit it shook me for a while. Fast forward to 4 months later, I had gone out to sea with another submarine of the same type. While I was there, I met a sailor who had previously served on my ship. After a few weeks of standing watch with him, he told me a story of a sailor who had committed suicide while on watch when he served on my ship almost a decade earlier, in engine room lower level, in his utilities. I wish I could have gotten a picture of the look on my face. I'm sure it was the definition of disbelief. Stayed in barracks the Germans used to house Polish prisoners of war. I'd regularly put things in places only to find them in the middle of the floor after leaving the room. Used to be F-22 avionics for the USAF. 2A3X2. No shred. At an undisclosed base, a light appeared above the flight line moving in odd ways and hovering. We called it into our number 1 and he called other AMUs to ensure there were no sorties being flown that we didn't know about. Shortly after F-22s and 16s were scrambled and could not intercept the object, it disappeared into the night. We saw this go down from our flight line. Shortly after, we were informed that this never happened. Edit. Phones are not allowed on this flight line. We wrote it off as some of the instructors messing with us, but while training at JWTC, there was a blood-curdling scream in the middle of the night. Definitely sounded like a woman. The LT in charge made us do a quick accountability check, then he started radioing the training center to see what the hell happened. The instructors went out from their compound, did some checks but didn't find anything. They said it's not the first time they had units out there calling in to report the same thing. Edit. Just to clarify, JWTC is Jungle Warfare Training Center. It is in Okinawa, Japan. Some of the thickest fighting of World War II happened in Okinawa. One time at an Air Force base in the Rock we had a power outage at night. All of us walked out of our hangar doors to take a see what the problem may have been, and we saw a very large triangular shape passing over our hangar. It was a clear moonless night previously, and when we went outside to look around we noticed the starscape being covered then slowly uncovered. No sound associated with the event other than normal sounds of the location. I'll never forget. Is a dude vanishing spooky enough? I was on one rooftop on post with another Marine, and on the building next to mine was a dude smoking a cigarette. I looked to my partner to mention it, but when we looked again he was gone. The roof access door for that building was very rusty and loud, so there's no way he snuck out in those few seconds it took to get my partner's attention. Can the food in the Navy chow hall be considered paranormal? I saw a UFO when I was in basic training at Fort Lee Norwood. I was walking from one building to another to start my firewatch shift when I noticed something as bright as a star make a zigzagging pattern at impossible speeds and then disappear over the horizon. I had never been more clear-headed and sober in my life, so I'm sure I saw something. Not my story, but from an article. 5. The firefight that never happened. Tyler Richards. Al-Qaim, Iraq 2006/2007. The train station was attacked by insurgents in the middle of the night. Every post was returning fire with crew-served weapons. Cut went out the wire to engage fighters, and were talking cobras on using the tow system. Everyone had their fair share of trigger time. When daylight broke, QRF went out to do a BDA. They found 0 bodies, 0 spent rounds, 0 blood trails. The posts had bullet impacts on the bulletproof windows, and everyone with thermals saw fighters dropping and maneuvering. No one knows what happened to this day. Still a mystery. 3rd BN 4th Marines. There's a couple more in here that are pretty good or awesomer than. I hope you get a lot of answers on this. I love reading this junk before bed for some reason. I'm not in the military, but I did read Hal Muir's book We Were Soldiers once. And young, and there were multiple instances of North Vietnamese soldiers just walking straight up to US forces in the middle of combat. They'd look at them and they wouldn't even raise their weapon or unsling it. They would just start laughing at the US soldiers. Then the US guys would shoot them. I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation of why this happened, but it's pretty creepy that the enemy might just walk up to you and just start laughing in your face, seemingly not caring whether you shoot them or not. I worked in Arlington National Cemetery while I was in the army. The tomb guards always talked about seeing or just hearing soldiers marching some nights. We were cataloging graves one night when I thought I saw the soldier in my team up ahead. So I called him over. He answered from behind me. When I looked back, the other soldier was gone. I am a skeptic and I believe everything paranormal has a real world explanation, but I'm still trying to figure that one out. Navy. When I was in Groton CT, for basic enlisted submarine school, I was roving the barracks at night. I had a UI under instruction, so I was showing him the ropes, what to check and how to check. It was mainly fire extinguishers and secure doors. Well, on the 2nd or 3rd floor of the barracks there is a recreation room with a TV and chairs and a piano. Mind you, everyone was asleep and it was 0200 in the morning. Well, I decided to go and see if I remembered how to play the piano a little. We decided to continue to finish the patrol, so we started walking down the hall when we heard a single piano note go off. We both heard it while I was in mid-conversation, so we kind of looked back, and then we both looked at each other to see if we both had heard the same noise. We shrugged it off as our imaginations running wild. But as soon as we got to the end of the hall and opened the door to the stairway, a sharp key note was heard coming from down the hall in the direction of the room with the piano. We left the floor as soon as possible and later shared the story with some shipmates, and they told us stories of sailors that had died in the barracks. Not my story, so I'll tell it as best I can. This happened during a rotation at the National Training Center sometime in 2015. A battle was occurring at night. A light appeared in the sky and for 10 minutes or so there was silence. This may not seem too interesting until you look at the numbers and statistics. You're looking at massive amounts of people and equipment during a rotation. Constant radio chatter, vehicle noise, people talking, etc. And suddenly just nothing. Then the light seemed to make a couple strange turns, one being around 90 degrees, and split and disappear. Aliens. No joke. I was in the stand and I saw these green lights hovering slowly about 100 meters away. Then suddenly they got 3x as big and shot straight up at a speed no human could survive. It was like watching something accelerate through a railgun. Straight up. Then it turned red and disappeared. I'm a very logical person, and I have a TS clearance, but I know that we don't have this sort of technology yet. During a deployment to South America, my SFA team encountered what I can only describe as a stealth-like hunter alien with dreadlocks. He killed us off one by one in the most efficient, effortless manner. Keep in mind we were all seasoned operators out of FT Bragg. Pretty much all 6 shield Tyrannosauruses. My CO was the only one who made it out alive after engaging the enemy in hand-to-hand combat but eventually getting to the chopper. Former USCG here. Saw a ghost and some creepy it happened when we were removing the old Fresnel lens from the press car light in Michigan. Also, seen some weird creepy lights on street. Elmo's fire near the old Wargashans light. Compasses and radios all quit. Radar and GPS wouldn't work either. The light near Sturgeon Bay is haunted as well. And we stayed at the light near Two Rivers, and the whole family saw the ghost. There are several lights in the Great Lakes that are open to active, reserve, and retired military members as vacation rentals. We stayed at Raleigh Point Lighthouse and the Sherwood Point Lighthouse. They have visitors logs that are like a diary, and multiple stories are in there about the hauntings, dating back to the 70s. I know that Sherwood Point is haunted. Girl hung herself in a space right around the corner from where I sleep. I won't go in that space for about 2 days after. When I did, I opened the door and a super loud screeching screaming noise came out from somewhere. There are a lot of noises on a Navy ship, but this one came out the second I closed the door. Needless to say, I have yet to return to that space. When I was deployed, we worked out of this ancient dock from the Vietnam era. I worked graveyard, so there was never any people there at night except mission essential for any missions we were running. We would randomly hear footsteps walking down the small hallway that was a dead end. Our door was the last one before the little bit that was the dead end. No one ever walked past our door, but there was always the footsteps. One night there were wet footprints down there and it wasn't even raining outside. Not a US militant, but when my dad was in the army, their general was a total ass to them. Rude, disrespectful, make them work until after midnight, picking on them instead of the others. So my dad and his friends were pissed and decided to freak the guy out. So they got the tallest man in the group and wrapped him up in white ghost-like fabric. They sent the man out a few decameters back, and sure enough, when the general came, crossing the path, the man started going up and down like a tube man and screaming like he's being possessed. The man was insanely tall, so he made it funnier. The general took off yelling demon demon and never bothered going back that way at night. The general was convinced because our culture actually believe in demons and curses, so it worked perfectly. My dad swears up and down that he saw something blip on the radar while at sea in a way that meant it was traveling at ridiculous speeds. He was an anti-air missile guy in US Navy back in the 70s and early 80s. Not paranormal, but he also told me about how when they came into port in, I think it was Romania, the KGB types would try to act like civvies and ask them things like how much money the sailors made and such. Of course my dad told them he owned like 5 sports cars back home, made 6 figures, and that the missiles on his ship could accurately hit targets well beyond their actual range. When I was in basic training, there was a ghost that haunted our barracks. It never did anything evil, but it kept slipping peanut butter packs into my locker at night for the drill sergeants to find. It was so weird because I would never steal from the defuk. Civil servant here. My squadron is in a secretive installation that is attached to a base in one state but is under the command of another. Anyway, the entire place is haunted AF. Among many weird paranormal things I've experienced, my favorite by far is seeing long dead pilots or aircrew literally flight checking their birds. It's fascinating and rather sad. They are totally in their element. They disappear quickly, but I've noted uniforms from several different decades and branches. It used to freak me out, but now it's just a thing. Everyone just accepts it like it's normal. A lot of the maintainers see them. It's only creepy when I'm there alone super early in the morning before the sun is up. Some of them glow almost trip out. Okinawa. There are places on the island that the local National Gate guards will not stand a post on during certain times of day because of dead Japanese soldiers during the war. There are also supposedly places where again dead Japanese soldiers will walk up and ask for a cigarette. Never saw it personally, but you never know. Saw a bunch of servicemen's wives get slowly replaced by dependent muses. One of my drill sergeants actually has a creepy story from one of his Afghanistan deployments. He was infantry, so being in the field and out of missions for multiple weeks wasn't uncommon. One night while sleeping in a fighting position he felt something nibbling at his feet. He woke up and kicked it off, and what he saw wasn't any type of marsupial but a little humanoid figure he could only describe as looking just like Gollum. But being in the field with little sleep, he chalked it up to just seeing things. A couple days later he and another guy and on watch, and the other guy pointed out something and said, "What the duck is that?" and pointed at a stone wall in the distance. My drill sergeant looked through his binoculars, and crawling across the top of this stone wall was the exact little humanoid creature he encountered a few nights before. Upvoting because I want to read more later. I'm waiting to see the Marines that went through MCT on the East Coast that saw the lady in white. Edit. It's the combat instructors ducking with the students when they're sleep deprived. I was an armorer there and heard the students talking about it. So I asked the instructors if they were doing that. They confirmed. I think they still do it, lol. Edit 2. Apparently it happened last November. So they're still doing it. Was in Iraq and 06. My month was up to rotate to the free on board for guard duty. We used it as a break from patrolling the city we were in. The place was called Baharia and it was a massive compound that Saddam's sons used to abuse and torture women. Supposedly we never actually looked it up. The guard tower was 2 stories high and you had to use a metal spiral staircase to get up go the second floor. One night about halfway through our post, me and my buddy are bulleting to pass the time and we hear someone sprinting up the stairs in full gear. It was loud. We quickly grab our helmets and put them on while I flick my cigarette out. We wait and wait. Slowly I turn around to look at the stairs and grab my surefire and saw no one is there. I tell my buddy I'm going to go look and make sure the cog isn't lying in wait. I make my way down the stairs to the entrance of the tower and use my surefire to look down the road in front of me and to my right. No one is there. No truck snuck up on us and no gator vehicle was outside. The walls on both sides of the road leading to our tower were 20 feet high and had broken bottles at the top, so we know no one climbed over. Tower 5 was also at the corner of a compound that was miles long on each side. I went back upstairs and told him I didn't see anyone. He didn't believe and checked himself. When he came back up his face turned white and we sat in silence the rest of our shift. We always traded when we could to not go back up there. While serving in the US Army in Germany in the 80s, my job was to guard the border and do patrols at night. One night we came upon a balloon flying through the sky from the east. This was a no-fly zone and to see this balloon freaked myself and my SGT out. Later on we found out that it was defectors from East Germany and their family flying in the balloon, and they landed safely about 4 miles from us. Although I never got to see the family, I later found they had tried once before and failed. Freedom at all costs. I still have chills from seeing that thing blasting the gas nozzles to lift it along. Turned out to be a huge event and the balloon caught fire and almost crashed. Shocking to see that thing coming across the border and wondering what it was. I was in the Navy from 2001 to 2006. I saw some messed up things, but this one took the cake. I was stationed in Norfolk, VA, and at my squadron our supply officer, Suppo, was this really nice guy. A bit of nerd type, but overall really chill and down to earth. Always went out of his way to help people and also would give us extra gear if we asked. I'd even been to his house a few times for cookouts and just to hang out. He would take leave a lot though and often leave early on Fridays. Around this same time, 2004 or 2005, the local PD had a crazy investigation on their hands. Suitcases full of human body parts were either washing ashore or being found on the side of the road. Nobody could figure out who was doing it or why. I mention this because a few weeks go by and an all squadron email had gone out saying the suppo's wife had gone missing and if any of us had seen her or heard anything about her whereabouts to report it immediately. Of course, nobody comes forward with any info because nobody knew he was married. I've been to his house and never saw any photos of him with his wife. To me it seemed like a typical bachelor pad. Anyway, a week goes by and police search teams find a body in the woods and it's confirmed to be her. It's all over the news that they found her and when they interview him, he's stone-faced, like zero emotion at all. After a lengthy investigation he confesses to killing her and dumping her body in the woods. He also confessed to putting one of the suitcase of body parts on the road but not any of the others. This shook me up because I felt like I knew the guy pretty well. We joked around a lot at work and just seemed like such a normal guy.